Now we're back for part 3, and we're gonna start on my spices. And I have to say, I had some trouble hopping over some pretty ugly history. So we have we run into some problems with the lore getting from way back. There's just no getting over it for indigenous lore, I think, in some with some herbs. So we'll look at it. We'll see what we think. So
I'm going to real quick, you can keep going, but I'm going to turn off my video because I'm going to move to my desk. My charger is over there.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll be in a new background when you
Ooh, new background. Okay. So let me share my screen. Okay. So kitchen witchery spices, kitchen bewitchery spices. And we're talking about allspice and nutmeg. We're going to start with allspice. And it was funny because I wish Roz was here because it is pimenta and it is pimento, and we will talk about that. There's like an interesting thing with that. But the actual Latin name is either Pimenta officinalis or Pimenta dioica. And this is the botanical drawing of what it looks like. And this is what AI thinks it looks like. Probably not a terrible little image of it there, but it goes to show what it is. They're little berries there. That's what allspice is. So compared to other spices, which are other things that we're going to look at, like the next herb, nutmeg, is quite a different beast altogether. It is certainly not this berry bunch that we see. So allspice, the parts used are the berry, but also the bark and the leaves are used in various ways. And other names of it are Basheen, Edo, Jamaican pepper, which is interesting. I should have looked up these names. I didn't. Curabaga, Madeira, pimento, clove pepper, corunda, myrtle pepper, and new spice. So the reason why it's called allspice, though, is because it has this aromas and many of the taste of many spices. So some of the ones that people have said it's included is cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, pepper, and juniper. It's used, I don't know if I said this, but it's used in both savory and sweet preparations as well. So the correspondences for allspice. So the deities are Aphrodite, Venus, Oya, and then Yoruba, who is the Orisha of winds, lightning, and violent storms, death, and rebirth, and Sekhmet, who is the Egyptian goddess of war and healing. So for some reason, I felt the need to bring those out. The element is fire, which I agree with. The planet, nobody could really agree on the planet here either. So Mercury, Mars, possibly Uranus, nobody could agree. I think we need to drill into what these, I have a couple books that go take herbs apart just based on the planets, and I would really like maybe that should be our next thing after we get tired of the bewitchery, the kitchen bewitchery. I'd really like to tear apart what these planets mean. Okay, the astrological sign is Aries or Scorpio. So I kind of like Aries. It's pretty I liked fire for it. So the chakra, though, is the root and the sacral chakra, and the moon mansion is 18, the stream. So the plant information. So this is an evergreen tree, and it's native to the rainforest in Central and South America. And you're supposed to harvest these before the berries are ripe, and then you dry them out. And then when they're dry, you hear a little rattling sound when they're ready. And so the reason why it's pimento dioica is because there's a male and female flowers. They grow on different trees. So it's a food spice. It's a jerk seasoning. We'll talk more about that. It's used in curry, mulled wines, cordials. And it is the only spice that only grows in the Western Hemisphere, much to other people's chagrin. So So the Mayans used it in as an embalming agent, which is an interesting one and kind of gives it a reason why some of these like death associations with it, this life and death kind of thing that we were talking about, kind of association. But they also used it to flavor chocolate. So it was part of their, and we do know that chocolate and vanilla were being used in ritual, and it was reported by the West was that Montezuma, they came upon Montezuma drinking chocolatl, but with vanilla, but they didn't mention allspice, but it was also used to flavor chocolate. So it was also an important herb for the Arawak people. So now these people were originally from this island, it's Antilles, but then the Arawak people mostly reside in Guyana. And they were the first people to use the technique of barbecuing meat and made it like a technique. It was called like the barbecued meat was called boucans, and the settlers that cooked it were called buccaneers. So anyway, but it's funny how that name came into being, but it was from barbecue. And they used allspice as part of their barbecuing, which we're going to find a bit, that's kind of like a theme as well. So this is the lore, stories, and culture of the West Indies. So this spice was unknown to the European continent until Spanish explorers came across it here. So that's like, first of all, a lot of things were. So it's interesting to note which were. It's shocking. Like I mentioned, like it's I love it. It's beautiful that we have like this idea about that it was always around, but it was like always around here, but it was not around to like Europe. So when the European explorers came across it in the West Indies, they called it pimenta. And that's the Spanish word for pepper. And so they called it pimenta or Jamaican pepper because it looked like a pepper, like the berries look like pepper. And so that's especially when it was dried, it got like really like dark and like and so it was just mistaken because there is a hint of peppery taste to allspice, but it's not a pepper. So the best is that it never grew well in Europe. So no matter, they tried to take it. So there was like this mythology that Christopher Columbus, quote, discovered allspice, which I love that. That's always like my favorite lore. My favorite lore is the discoveries that Christopher Columbus made. Anyway, but they tried to bring it back to Europe, but it wouldn't grow in Europe. It never grew well. So
Columbus was our tie-in this week.
Yeah, so this is a spice trade herb as well. So both of these herbs are considered spice trade herbs, which means that they were traded against human flesh at some time. I think that's really like where I come down with it. Like, why does it get, it's like, we're going to understand that it was worth a lot of money. These herbs were worth a lot of money. And the unfortunate thing is like, I don't know, maybe like tulips were worth a lot of money at one time, like unnaturally high rates of like money that these spices get these rates of, they get inflated unnaturally a bit. And so if they were inflated unnaturally during a certain part in our history, in our world's history, then they were worth so much that they were traded against human flesh. And then that caused it to be associated with this money association, was because it was worth so much money. But it's it got really gross. So again, spice trader viewer. So, but this was actually a spice trade herb in Jamaica, and it was always there, and every part of the tree is used in jerk cooking. The wood, the leaves, and the berries, they like create this smoke that they use to smoke their food. And the berries are exported out of Mexico and Central America today, but everybody's like, it's known that the best allspice comes out of Jamaica. It's like a very important herb to their cooking, to jerk cooking. And then we go to England because, of course, what do you think? What on earth could the white person do when they get a hold of like beautiful scented wood? Well, they used it all to near extinction because they wanted it as canes and umbrella handles during Victorian times. So they like Jamaica had to like ban the export of like this because ban the export of the trees because they were just using it to extinction because there's no what is the word when you have often in Christian churches they use it to like say that like God gave like us the earth, but it's like we're just using it. It's like not really ours to use. Like we're just using it like so we have to be careful with it. Like we have to be kind to it. Like there's no sense of that by like white people discovering other things. There's no sense of that like we have to like we there's some care that should be taken to make sure that we don't like destroy things. There's always like this history of like, well, what do you think happens? Like, like we get a hold of it. Well, we mine it to extinction, and then we try to put it in places it won't grow, and we think that that's like I don't know. Anyway, so there's so I feel like the history of herbs and plants is like littered with stories, like even like Goodyear and like the rubber trees, like that story is a fiasco. Like like so anyway, the magical properties of allspice. So it's used for energy. It's uplifting and filled with motivation. And I also like to think that like we have to remember that this is in jerk cooking. This is a joyous herb. I think that's where some of this uplifting and motivating feeling comes from it. And even the healing. So if you have mental tension, you're supposed to carry the berries and it's supposed to provide healing from accidents. It's a good health amulet to just carry the berries. And I was trying to think that an amulet though versus a talisman. It's like a health talisman, isn't it? Because talismans are supposed to bring good luck, right? Is that right? And then amulets are supposed to like guard against something. I don't know what the difference is. I was trying to figure it out today, but anyway. I
I
don't know.
feel like an amulet, I don't know how accurate this is, but I feel like an amulet is like worn and a talisman is carried.
Okay.
I don't know. That's
Okay.
a distinction I make.
So then luck, it's used for luck. So carry the whole bean to beat the competition or win over a person in an interview. But I think that feeds into like the whole money part of it. So it's like the biggest thing it's probably known for is this money part, the success. So, but there are all sorts of interesting ways that it's used in I feel like hoodoo and that are probably part of the indigenous populations that like that's who is feeding into these kind of things. So maybe there is something to it if you feel called to use it for money. I would probably suggest going that direction. So one of the things that I found was to put berries in a green bag with nutmeg, chamomile, bayberry, Irish moss, alfalfa, cinnamon, and high John the Conqueror. Dress it with money drawing oil and then recite the 23rd Psalm. You can, okay, so this is an interesting one. Season food intentionally with the intention of adding wealth. So like use it intentionally for business success. And there's this whole thing for a wash. So like there's a lot of like washes where you can wash your front of your store or whatever. So this one you're supposed to put 1 tablespoon of allspice, a teaspoon of saltpeter, a half a cup of sugar in a bucket of water, and then you're supposed to mop from the sidewalk to the door and in the store and to the back of the building, like kind of guiding people, probably like bringing in that joyousness and the money and the people and the good feelings. And I would draw on that. If I were using it for joyousness and money and wealth and healing and all that stuff, I would definitely draw on like the feeling of like jerk food even and like the joy of making that and like the feeling of like that's like part of a cultural heritage that's like filled with joy and filled with like laughter and goodness in that cooking. Like the spirit of that cooking is like a anyway, so I would key into that probably if I were keying into that. So the magical properties continued: virility, carnal desire, fertility. So make a necklace of the berries. And then finding hidden treasures, aids in psychic awareness. And so mental and emotional strength. And it's used to amplify magic. And I find a lot of these spicy ones are good for amplifying magic. Like even cinnamon, I've used as a magic amplifier a lot because they pack a punch, because it's like that spice, that like that punchy spiciness of it. So, and then I put that my disclaimer. So the medicinal properties, so that I don't have to say it, is an aromatic, a stimulant, a carminative, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-proliferative, which is another interesting one. What is an anti-proliferative? Probably the same thing about that mutagenic, but let's see. Anti-proliferative.
I thought that was something with bleeding.
It is used or tending to inhibit a cell growth.
Oh, okay.
Apoptosis inducing. I don't know what anyway. And a hypotensive. So it's used for colds and women's medicine. Used in Jamaica, it's used for dysmenorrhea, and in menopause, it's used in women's medicine for menopause. It's also used for stomach ailments, as we found that many of these herbs are used, or many of these spices are good for stomach ailments and like carminatives, and because even some of the traditional Indian herb spices are used that way. Do you have something to say, Roz?
No.
Okay. So it's used for dyspepsia in Jamaica and Costa Rica, indigestion in Cuba. It's also used externally. So you're supposed to crush the berries and use for bruises, sore joints, and myalgia, which I think is muscle pain. And more in Ayurvedic medicine, it's used for respiratory congestion and for toothache. It's also used for neuralgic pain, cancer, and like I put an article up there because it's used. So the whole deal with cancer is that it's because they were taking constituents of it and using those for chronic inflammation and anti-tumor properties. And so I suggest, if you want this, you should look at I have an article up here at the very end that is not, of course, here because we're going to go on, but at the very end of the nutmeg, I'm going to put my sources for both, which is a mistake I won't do again. But you can get that article and you can find out about it. Anyway, so let's stop this really quick.